So like I said at the beginning of class, you want to get, you don't want to wait till the last minute on the homework, because what I hope to do in the last, for the last lecture of each chapter is to have some time to go over any homework questions. And if you wait to the last minute, you're not going to have any homework questions because you haven't done anything yet. So next Tuesday, hopefully we will have some time to go over homework questions. So you've got the weekend to get into that homework if you haven't already started it. I know several of you have already started. But you'll have the weekend to do that, and then come with any questions on Tuesday when we finish up. And then next Tuesday evening at midnight, 11:59 p.m., so it's still on Tuesday, is when your Chapter 1 homework is due, and that's in the Chapter 1 folder there, your Cengage assignments. The assessment is not due until the following week. But the other homework assignments are. Also, the extra credit assignments, you've noticed there are some extra credit assignments in each chapter. Let's go to those. Those aren't due until the following week as well. So that actually gives you a chance to see how you did on the homework, and if you want a few extra points, you've got that opportunity to do that. So yeah, so the adaptive study is an extra credit assignment, and then the videos, then these are Cengage videos, these are not my videos, are an extra credit as well. So that one you just have to do it. I don't think there are any questions. There might be some questions to answer. I'm not quite sure. I can't remember. It's been a while since I set it up. But those are some opportunities there for you. And I think that adaptive study is worth 10 points extra credit, up to 10 points extra credit. So it is dependent upon how well you do on it. And then the videos, if you view those, I think those are 5 points extra credit. So some pretty hefty extra credit opportunities for you. But those, again, aren't due until the following week. This is what is due. Whoops, sorry. This, the homework is what is due next Tuesday, and what will be, I'll be answering any questions on next Tuesday. Okay. All right. Any questions about that stuff? No? Okay. I have a tendency to ask people when I'm on doing virtual teaching. I have a tendency to ask if anybody has any questions, and then just not even give people a time to ask questions. So if I do that, please stop me. So that's why I stopped myself. Let's see. So I did send out a message that I posted Tuesday's lecture video, which obviously is a shorter lecture video because we had so many technical issues. We really didn't get a whole lot of opportunity to go through the material, but it is up there for you to view again if you want to do that. All right. So again, any questions before we get started? Nope. All right. Awesome. So we're going to continue on with our, let me put this on Do Not Disturb, because otherwise it's going to disturb me. There we go. So we're going to continue on talking about some of these laws. Again, Chapter 1, kind of dry. We just sort of review all of this stuff. And again, I'm not going to go into heavy detail on the laws pertaining to discrimination and pertaining to kind of HR type of issues, but these are all things that I just want you to have a basic knowledge of what they are in general, what the law does to protect employees. I don't expect you to know the details about it. So the next one, I think this is where we left off. Correct me if I'm wrong. We went through Family Medical Leave Act, I believe. We did talk about that. I can't remember if we talked about the Uniform Services Employment Act, but that's where we'll start out today. So this particular act, again, so 1994, what it did was it protected military members of the military who, if they're deployed, oftentimes, especially, the National Guard, people will have, members of the National Guard will have a day job. National Guard is what, like 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks out of the year that they actually have to serve, but they can be called to active duty, which means they're going to have to leave their regular day job while they're on active duty. This particular act protects them from essentially being terminated or coming back to a lower ranking position when they return to civilian life. Now, it doesn't guarantee that they get the same position, because it could be that, if they're deployed for a year, that employer is going to have to find somebody to fill that position, and then they can't just, it's very difficult to hire somebody new, bring them in, train them, and then when the old person comes back, say, okay, well, thank you, bye, send you on your way. But the military member returning to their civilian job is entitled to retain their seniority and at least an equal pay as to what they were receiving before. So it's as though they didn't leave. They may not be placed in the exact same position that they were before, but they will at least retain their pay and their position of seniority within the company. Also, so it has to be granted. They have to get them rehired within the 2 weeks of their job request and the health benefits. So when they're on active duty, they're covered by the military insurance. When they're civilians, they very well may be covered by their employer's insurance. They have to be allowed to come back and resume that health coverage with their civilian job immediately. So there's no waiting period for it. So that one, and a lot of these, you don't even have to know a lot about the law. You just look at the title and you can kind of figure out what it's about, right? So the Uniformed Services Employment Reemployment Rights Act, that's going to pertain to military members who are in the military. ERISA, the acronym is ERISA, Employment Retirement Income Security Act. This particular act, and it was passed in 1974, this particular act, what it does is it protects pension funds of employees. Now, it does not mandate that employers have to have a pension, that they have to even offer retirement benefits. But if they do offer retirement benefits, and if that retirement benefit happens to be a pension type plan, then this act protects individuals, those employees who are participants in that plan. Zero vesting for the first 5 years of service, 100% vesting at the end of the 5th year. So what does vesting mean? Some of you may be familiar with that term, others maybe not. Vesting means that the employee has the rights to those funds if they leave employment. So if somebody is 100% vested and they've got $100,000 in their retirement account, that means that if they leave that employment, then they are able to take that $100,000 with them. Now, it would probably be transferred into a different retirement account, but because they're 100% vested, that means they get 100% of those funds. If they are not 100% vested, and vesting is always described in percentage terms. So you'll see this 3 to 7 year vesting, 20% of vesting after 3 years of service. That means that they're entitled to 20% of the funds. And when we're talking about the funds in the retirement account, we're talking about funds that the employer has contributed. The employee is always entitled to 100% of the funds that they themselves have contributed. Oftentimes, employers will also contribute to retirement funds for their employees. So when we're talking about that vesting, it's the amount that the employee is entitled to of those employer contributed funds. Okay, so this protects employees with regard to those amounts that the employer has contributed. Now, of course, it doesn't guarantee a certain return on their investment. It doesn't guarantee that there is no risk to their investment. There's still, because it's, if funds are invested in the market, there's going to be market risk involved. There's no protection there, but it does just protect, the amounts that have been invested by from the employers, from the employer. So just some more details about ERISA. ERISA is usually how it is described. We usually don't say Employment, Retirement, and Income Security Act. Yeah, Lisa, go ahead.
I have a question. I don't know if ERISA does this, but what about, like, for instance, for the people that worked at Dawes, when Dawes went over to do whatever their name is, everyone there lost all of their money. And wouldn't have this protected them somehow?
This probably would have, it depends. I don't know the specifics of what happened at Dawes and what type of retirement plan that was. Because they could have lost, like, for example, Enron. When Enron occurred, a lot of employees lost their jobs and they lost all of their retirement savings, but it wasn't a pension that Enron had. It's just that the employees had purchased so much stock in the company, and that was within their retirement accounts, and the stock of the company, the value went down to zero. So that could be the same sort of situation with Dawes, and that again would just be a market risk that that employees take if they're buying stock of the company that they are actually employed by. Then if that company goes out of business, not only have you lost your job, you've also lost your retirement, because the value of that has gone down to zero. So it could be that that's what happened, but I don't know the specifics of Dawes. If it were like a traditional pension, now, obviously, we've heard a lot in the news over the years about pensions going bankrupt, because unfortunately what happens is employers, and a lot of times these are government agencies like cities, I don't know if there's many states, but counties, where they'll borrow the retirement funds for some other purpose, and then, or they'll make really bad investment decisions. So this, I don't know that this necessarily protects those poor investment decisions. I don't have enough knowledge of the act, but I suspect because Dawes did go out of business that may have at least played a part in it. But I'd have to look, read up about exactly what happened at Dawes to know the answer to that question. But
okay.
Good,
well, I guess
that
question.
Was on
my mind because I had two really close friends that lost everything.
Yeah.
Seniority
I
miss. So.
Yep, absolutely. And I miss Dawes. Dawes was.
Why?
When I was growing up, Dawes was the store. It wasn't Hy-Vee, but I think Dawes' problem was they didn't really change with the times, whereas Hy-Vee did. So it just, they didn't keep up with it. But yeah, so essentially that's what ERISA does. It has to do with pension benefits. Next up, the Affordable Care Act. I'm sure a lot of you are at least somewhat familiar with this, or maybe have heard of it, the ACA, otherwise known as Obamacare. This was passed in 2010. And what it does a lot of things, and it changed a lot of things. Before the Affordable Care Act was enacted, insurance companies could pretty much get away with health insurance companies could get away with pretty much almost anything. And it was all up to the state's insurance divisions to enforce the state laws with regard to selling health insurance. And what was pretty common at the time, or before this was passed, was health insurance companies. First off, it was very difficult. If you were an individual who did not have health insurance coverage through your employer or through the government somehow, maybe Medicaid or Medicare, if you were just kind of on your own to obtain health insurance, it was very difficult to obtain it, even for relatively healthy individuals. It was the applications that the insurance company would have you fill out would ask you questions like, have you been to the doctor at any time in the past 10 years? If so, what was the reason? And give details of the diagnosis. You know, if you go to the doctor a couple of times a year for sinus infection here, an ear infection there, a broken wrist, that sort of thing, you can't remember that stuff. And what they would do is, even if they approved, so they could deny you for pretty much any reason they wanted to. They didn't like, you know, it was all about risk. And if they felt that you were going to cost them more in health insurance benefits than the premiums that you're paying, they would deny you coverage. So if you had maybe some sort of congenital issue, or you were on blood pressure medication, or you know, your cholesterol was a little bit high, they could just deny you health insurance. So you really didn't have a whole lot of recourse. If you met the income guidelines, you could apply for Medicaid, or if you're old enough, you could be on Medicare. But if you didn't, then you were pretty much out of luck with regard to getting health insurance. So the first problem was it was difficult to even obtain health insurance in the first place. And secondly, those who were lucky enough then to obtain health insurance, if the insurance company found that there was any information that had been omitted from your original application. So for example, have you had any doctor's appointments over the last 10 years? What were they? Give us detailed information about them. If you forgot about that, you know, when you had the flu 7 years ago and you went to the doctor and got prescribed some Tamiflu, if you forgot about that, they would get the medical records, go through them. They would find out that you had that appointment, but you didn't put it on your application. They could then rescind your policy. Say, okay, well, here are your premiums back. We're not going to cover you. And if you would use your insurance at any point while you thought you were covered, then you would be responsible for any of those payments. So it was pretty nasty. It was very nasty business. And obviously, unless, you know, if your employer provided you health insurance, you were protected. They couldn't do those things to you. They had to provide health insurance if you were an employee and you were qualified for the health insurance. But if you were an individual, they had all sorts of ways that they could make your life difficult with regard to obtaining health insurance and with regard to keeping it. So what the Affordable Care Act did, in addition to a lot of things, which I'm not going to go into the detail, I don't even know all the detail, that the act was huge and had all sorts of ramifications and changes to the health insurance industry. But two of the things that it did was it mandated that insurance companies could no longer deny health insurance to applicants. They had to accept them. Another way that they would deny health insurance prior to this act was they would just make it so outrageously expensive that nobody could afford it. So they wouldn't maybe say, yeah, we'll give you health insurance, but it's going to cost you, you know, your premium's going to be $4,000 a month. Like, well, who can afford that, right? That's just ridiculous. So that would be another way that they would deny it. The Affordable Care Act brought into play price protections, for one. Now, when you couldn't be denied health insurance, and your ability to pay for the health insurance was a consideration in what the premium cost was. And the federal government also kicked in a portion, if you qualified financially, would kick in a portion or maybe all of the premium cost. It also outlawed rescission. So once you had that health insurance, they couldn't go back. The only reason they could cancel it is if you didn't make the payment, if you didn't pay the premium, and then they couldn't go back to previous months or years and rescind it retroactively. They could only terminate it currently. So It also mandated a lot of other things, like the insurance companies now have to pay for certain benefits, which before they didn't have to, like maternity benefits, and like I think included for no charge for everybody has to be a physical once a year. So it brought into play a lot of protections for individuals. Obviously, there's still a lot of, I don't know, there's quite as much wrangling over it. There's, since 2010, which we're going on 13 years now. It was actually signed on my birthday in 2010. I remember that happening. Since, there were a lot of efforts to repeal this act. They went through the Supreme, the courts to try and say that it was unconstitutional. It was never unconstitutional. Even those who were opposed to it tended to be Republicans. I'm not going to get political here, but tended to be Republicans. They were never able to, even when they were charged, were never able to repeal this particular act. But it also, with regard to employers, and what it did was it also mandated certain provisions and certain protections if the employer offered health insurance. And employers with employees over, I think it's 50 employees or more, have to provide health insurance. So although some of those provisions were also weakened throughout the years, but it's still there. If you get, healthcare.gov is a website that the federal government put together, and some states have their own websites for it, that's where individuals who don't get insurance from their employer or from the government, that's where they go to purchase their health insurance. But it had, like I said, it had tons and tons of different provisions. But for employers, there were mandates, new mandates implemented with regard to employee protections and reporting, new reporting that was also required to provide. So big act. Like I said, they've tried over the past 13 years to get rid of it and have not been successful. And I think at this point they're probably not going to be successful. But who knows what could happen. Most Americans, I think, are in favor of it now. There was at the time, a lot of Americans were not, but I think most Americans they saw that the sky didn't fall, that we weren't, destroyed as a result of it. So they have kind of given up on trying to repeal it. Questions about that? I went into more detail than you probably need. Okay, so some other state laws that are out there, workers' compensation laws. Again, don't get this confused with unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance covers employees once they are unemployed, when they lose their job. Workers' compensation provides benefits when employees are injured or become ill on the job while working on the job. It is insurance. It's provided through private insurance companies, but there are state laws that mandate employers obtain this insurance for their employees. And of course, as with any insurance, the higher the risk, the higher the premium is going to be. So those types of jobs that are more prone to injury or illness, so think construction, think chemical plants, things along those lines, their workers' comp premiums are going to be much higher than, say, a CPA office would pay, although the CPA office would still be required to have workers' compensation for their employees. So the company pays for this insurance. Now, I suppose indirectly, employees pay for it in the form of lower wages, but directly, employers are the ones that pay for this insurance. State disability benefit laws. Okay, so there are some states, and I guess looks like there are 5 now. I know California is a big one, that have mandatory disability insurance. And for many of these, the employer and the employee will pay a portion of the premium. So this means that if an employee becomes disabled, whether on the job through actions on the job or off the job, so if they just get into a car accident and become paralyzed or something along those lines, then disability benefits will kick in and provide some income supplementation to that employee because they are no longer able to work. So this is in addition to Social Security disability. Iowa does not have any mandatory disability insurance for employers. State employees are probably covered by disability insurance, but private employers are not mandated to carry disability insurance. But there are some states where it is mandated, and the employee may bear a cost in that. Employers may bear a cost as well as employees may bear a cost, and it comes out of the employee's paycheck. So it would be an additional type of deduction or withholding from their paycheck. Okay, so before we start this, let's see, what do we have left here? Yeah, we've got a few slides left. Are there any questions about those laws? We're done with the laws. We're done with the employee protection and discrimination type laws. We still are going to go into detail about the tax laws. But any question? And I'm not an expert on them, so as you can probably tell. There may be other sources if you have specific questions. All right, so I thought I had posted a video in here. Let's talk, yeah, this one right here. So we're going to talk a little bit about human resources and what human resources does and what the responsibilities are for the human resources department. So I'm going to play this video. I want to make sure, let's see here, hold on just a second. I want to make sure that you'll be able to hear it. Okay.
Welcome back. This is the first video in lesson 2.
Okay. Can you guys hear his? Can you hear that? Okay. Cool. I might turn it up. Well, I guess I can't turn it up really that much. Am I? Okay. Welcome back.
Welcome back. This is the first video in lesson 2. The objective of lesson 2 is to convey an understanding that there are different ways of managing human resources. The first step is to make sure that everybody has a basic understanding of the key functions of human resources, HR. Welcome to my animation on the basics of human resources. Suppose somebody has an idea for a product or a service, maybe a new line of kites. So in order to make and sell these kites, we need some materials, like nylon fabric, string, some carbon fiber rods. But these inanimate objects aren't going to make anything on their own. How will the kites get constructed? We need people. How to market and sell them? We need people. How to collect revenue and pay expenses? We need people. How to deploy these people? We need more people. So human resources is critical to any organization. The first HR task is to figure out what work needs to be done and how to break this work into effective jobs. So we can start with a workflow analysis to determine the business processes that need to be completed. Then HR does a job analysis to figure out how to construct jobs to complete these required business processes. Suppose there are some production tasks like measuring and cutting. Maybe there's some business tasks that need to be completed in terms of accounting or inventory management or accounts receivable. And so we need to figure out these tasks and then put them into sensible jobs. So maybe in a small organization, we put these production tasks together into jobs, and these business tasks together into a job. But now we need people for these jobs. So the next HR function is recruitment and selection. You need to advertise these jobs, get job applicants, interview the applicants, figure out who has the skills and the aptitude for these jobs, and who's going to be a good fit with the organization. Once employees are hired, then you need an orientation program to onboard them, integrate them into the team, make sure they're fitting into the organization and they know what their tasks are and how to get things done in an appropriate way, consistent with the organization's values. Once people are part of the team, their performance needs to be managed. So you need to evaluate and assess what they're contributing, give them direction. Are they engaged? Are they motivated? Are they doing the correct things? Also, do they have the needed skills and the needed skills to advance? Do they have career development goals within the organization? So another key HR task is training and development. Employees need to be trained. This can take all different kinds. Wait a minute, not that kind of training. Yes, this kind of training. Employees can be trained in different ways: formal, classroom type training, informal, on-the-job training. Employees also need to be paid, rewarded, provided with benefits. So some of this might seem functional in terms of making sure people get a paycheck, but of course it's a lot more complicated than that, thinking about how money might provide an incentive, but also don't limit your thinking to rewards only being monetary. There's a number of reward and recognition programs that HR can lead in an organization. Do all of this successfully, and this idea or dream can be a reality, and you can create good products and services that the market will value. Now, there's also some specialized HR roles that also take place in organizations. You need to pay attention to health and safety, make sure that employees have the appropriate tools and safety practices, make sure it's a healthy work environment, which includes stress as well as physical threats to safety and health. Also need to manage diversity, make sure that diverse individuals are being recruited and managed and the organization is free of discrimination. Sometimes employees might choose to unionize, so labor relations is another important function of human resources. And there's also human resources information system, using data and metrics to try to guide the organization. But HR doesn't stop here. It should continue to reassess how business is done, how jobs are structured, what's the nature of tasks within the organization. Looking at this is called organizational development. And so the cycle of human resources continues through making sure you have correct individuals who are motivated, engaged, and their performance is managed correctly, and they're rewarded and compensated in appropriate ways. Now you should have a basic understanding of the key HR tasks in any organization. And this should reinforce the conclusions from the previous video that managing human resources is important, strategic, complex, challenging, and anything but boring. But there
All right.
are
So
different
just
ways
a
of
little, just a little background there on human resources and the human resources function. You know, most of us, when our interaction with human resources is sporadic, right? We might have a lot of interaction with them when we are first hired. Employees have a lot of interaction with human resources when they're applying for a job and when they are first hired. They also might have interaction with human resources if any issues come up, performance issues, and they would have interaction with them if they are terminated or if they, either voluntarily or involuntarily from the job. But there are a lot of things that human resources do kind of behind the scenes as well to keep the wheels turning with regard to the most valuable resource that a company has, which is their human resource. Now, you noticed in that video, a lot of the things that he mentioned didn't really talk about specifically about payroll, but there was that one function of compensation and benefits, and that's kind of where the payroll department fits in the whole scheme. Not in determining what the compensation is going to be or what the benefits are going to be, but in administering them properly. Okay. So human resources, all of those laws that we have discussed, human resources has to be aware of those laws. You saw in several of those different categories, things that have to be managed. Safety, think about OSHA. Think about the workplace, the OSHA requirements, the Occupational Safety Health Administration requirements have to be satisfied, and that safety, that's where that fits in. Diversity, that's where the like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the ADEA, I think off the top of my head, oh shoot, I had it. There's so many laws. It's sometimes hard for me to keep them straight as well. So the age discrimination, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that's what I was thinking of. All of those types of laws fit into that function for human resources. Compensation and benefits. So the ERISA law would fit into that facet of human resources and the payroll function, as well as all these tax laws that we're going to talk about. But additionally, some of the anti-discrimination laws would also come into play with that particular aspect. So you can see now that we've looked at the different laws and learned about kind of the cycle, the human resources cycle, there you can see how a lot of those laws fit into the responsibilities of the human resources function, but then also within that, the payroll function as well. Got to meet all of those federal and state law requirements. Individuals in human resources have to be up to date on any changes that are occurring at the legislative level, both locally, could be local laws as well. There are cities and counties that have their own labor laws. Now in Iowa, we really don't, because there's a state law that says that they can't. But there are other states where there are local and city laws that also come into play. But have to be up to date on those local laws, state laws, federal laws as well. Payroll department, you saw where it kind of fits in. It could be under the human resources department, and oftentimes it really is kind of under the umbrella, but it could be separate as well. Separate, but working very closely with the human resources department. I'm not going to talk about these things here. Our discussion activities. All right, so now we want to talk a little bit about the human resources system, which we got a little preview with that video. Now, small businesses oftentimes don't have a human resources department. If there's 10, 20 people in the office, it very well may be that there's one individual that does the accounting, the bookkeeping, the payroll, kind of the human resources and benefits for the company. Has all of those responsibilities. Or oftentimes as well, small businesses will outsource human resources. So just like with payroll can be outsourced. You can hire a separate company to manage that for you. Human resources is the same. Oftentimes small companies will do that. They'll hire another company to manage all of those human resources functions. But in the mid and large size companies, usually there will be a separate human resources department. And within that, probably the payroll department. Now, the responsibilities of human resources center around recruiting employees. It's all employee driven, right? It's all based on the employment needs of the company. Recruiting employees for positions, helping to select those employees. Now, oftentimes what happens is that the managers in specific departments are the ones that make the ultimate decision about who is going to be selected for a position. But HR may filter out certain employee applicants. So for example, so I was on a hiring committee last fall, and the list of applicants that the hiring committee received had already been whittled down, because HR went through, there are requirements for the job, certain educational requirements, experience requirements, and all of that. And they went through, and based upon the applications and the resumes that were submitted, they determined which individuals were not qualified for the position, so that the hiring committee only had to look at those who were actually qualified, didn't have to weed through individuals who weren't qualified for the position. So human resources will be involved in that respect, but usually, unless they're hiring for the human resources department, usually they don't make the ultimate decision on who is the best person for the job. It would be the individual department that would do that, or maybe a committee of individuals who would make that decision. So once that the employee is selected, human resources would also help to get them oriented. They would have them fill out, first off, all of their first day documents that need to be, all of the tax documents that need to be filled out, the immigration, the I-9 documents that need to be filled out, anything else that is specific to the position, so like state tax forms as well, withholding forms. If there's health insurance, maybe they would be eligible for, then they would have to fill out the forms for health insurance, retirement plans. All of that stuff is part of the orienting process. And that orienting process, of course, happens after the employee has actually been hired by the department and been brought on. Human resources would also probably, in a mid to large size company, provide an orientation to the employee as to how do things work in this company? How do we do things? What is the chain of command? What is, what are the functions of the different departments? Getting them familiar with the organization itself. I know when I was a new faculty member, it's almost 5 years ago, we had and it was put on by Human Resources. All new faculty have like a 2.5 day, full day orientation before we even start. This is for faculty. I don't know what the orientation procedures are for other staff and administrative professionals. But the faculty have like a 2.5 day orientation that they go through before classes start. In addition to that, your first year, you have 4 other full day orientation sessions that happen throughout the year. So it's a pretty big, it's a pretty lengthy orientation process, and it's to familiarize individuals with DMAC, with the college, with how things are done at the college, with different resources that are available to faculty, with different training materials that are at their disposal. Information about how to use the computers, Blackboard, all of that stuff. And it's managed by the Human Resources Department. So that was all part of the orienting. Training might be another part. Now with our faculty development, our training is continuous. We have, when you guys are off on those faculty development days, like so Friday, February, I don't remember what day it is, 17th, something like that. There's a faculty development day. You guys don't have class. Well, most students don't have class on Fridays anyway, unless they take my classes, which I always teach on Fridays. But if you have the campus is closed that day for it's a day of training for the faculty, and oftentimes also all staff will be involved in training as well. One of the things we're doing, we're moving to Canvas. We are switching from Blackboard to Canvas, and that is going to take place next fall. So starting fall 2023, all of our courses will be on Canvas rather than on Blackboard. That's going to require a lot of training. And Human Resources is going to be involved in that, as well as the Learning Technologies Department and IT departments. So that's an ongoing training that occurs, and Human Resources, though, would be in charge of putting all of those sessions together for that training. Now, obviously, it's not just technology training that we go through, and I'm just using DMAC as an example. Different companies have all sorts of different training opportunities for their employees, they do things differently, of course, than DMAC might, but this is the reference that I have. But those training sessions, if we don't have a big IT conversion that's going on, software conversion, we may have training on particular teaching techniques or different tools that can be used, or how do you integrate. When we went virtual, unfortunately, we didn't have training on going virtual because it happened so suddenly. It was, COVID hit and that was it. We were all sent home and we just had to kind of figure it out. Ideally, we would have had training on that if we knew that that was coming ahead of time. But Human Resources is in charge of that training. Additionally, they're in charge of terminating personnel. So they have, which is a very delicate matter, of course, especially if it's an involuntary termination. But the Human Resources Department would be there to make sure that all of the I's are dotted and all of the T's are crossed, and that everything is done in a legal manner, that the employee, if they're terminated, when they receive their last paycheck, that's going to depend on state law, but they would make sure that that last paycheck, that final paycheck, is issued on time. They would get the payroll department the information, payroll would produce the final paycheck, and then Human Resources would hand that off then to the employee. If in certain industries, employees, when they're terminated, either voluntarily or involuntarily, you always hear about that 2 weeks notice. You got to give 2 weeks notice, which is absolutely advisable because it gives the employer a chance to start searching for somebody else. Gives them a little bit of a heads up. But there are certain industries where even if you give the 2 weeks notice, they walk you out the door that day. And these are mainly industries where there's a lot of security involved, or they're trying to minimize chances of documents and information leaving with, and clients leaving with the employee. So it could be that depending upon the industry you're in, financial services is one of those industries, you give your notice and that day they just walk you out the door. They make sure that you're not taking anything with you or any clients or anything with you. So that's kind of a long-winded explanation of everything. Well, and it's not everything that Human Resources does. These are the main procedures and responsibilities of Human Resources. So they would put together job descriptions. So part of that recruiting process, HR would put together job descriptions for each job that is being posted. If you look, so I'll continue with the example of DMAC here. Let's look at DMAC. So if we look down at, there's an employment part here somewhere. There we go. Employment. And you can look at jobs. So let's look at administrative and professional positions that are available. Oh, not very many here, but this is a new leadership position that was just developed. This Vice President of Operations. So this is a rather high level position. You can tell by the salary. But this job description would be put together. Well, Human Resources would ultimately put it together, and they would make sure that it is accurate and they would double check everything, but the department as well would, whoever the supervisor is going to be, would also put this together to decide what types of qualifications they need. So what the job does, summary, salary information, job summary, so what are the responsibilities, essential functions, specifically what this individual is going to be doing. You can see there's a lot. Required qualifications. So these are the required qualifications at the bare minimum. So a bachelor's degree in a related field. Okay, so if we get applicants, if HR gets applicants that don't have a bachelor's degree, then they would weed those individuals out. They wouldn't even get past that first step. 10 years experience, experience in project planning and budget management. So these are very specific. Oops, let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Very specific required qualifications, desired qualifications. So these are the ones that it's not required. The right person could just have these qualifications, but we'd really like someone who also has these qualifications. So master's or PhD in one of these fields, management or leadership experience, FEMA safety management protocols, that sort of thing. Give some examples of what the physical requirements are of the position. So it's mostly a desk job. So it doesn't have a whole lot of physical requirements. Physical demand category, and this is a very detailed job description. Most job descriptions probably would not be this detailed, but it just depends on the organization and how they do it. What the work schedule is, if there's any testing that's required pre-employment. So like if there was heavy lifting involved, there might be some sort of physical test to make sure that you could actually lift what was required. The date that it was originally posted, and the deadline for submitting applications. So you can see this deadline hasn't passed yet. They're still accepting applications, but applicants would have until that deadline to submit them. And then this legalese, so DMAC, affirmative action, equal employment opportunity employer embraces diversity. And this part, affirmative action, equal opportunity, employment opportunity, that EEO is part of the federal law. I can't even think of it off the top of my head. I think it's the Civil Rights Act, is part of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. What you need to do in order to apply, so they want an application, they want transcripts. Now, oftentimes there's a place as well to submit additional information. So if you wanted to, a resume is not required, but you could submit a resume for this. The non-discrimination statement, again, this would be put together by the legal department. And then they want you to answer these specific questions. These are common for higher level positions within the organization, also faculty positions as well, would not be as common, I don't think, for other types of clerical type positions. But this is an example. It's, like I said, very detailed, very extensive. Let's see if there's one for here, support staff. See if we can find one that's administrative assistant. Okay, there aren't any with, I was looking for one with physical. Let's look at this one. They do give you, this is nice because there are a lot of job descriptions that don't give you a salary range, but DMAC does give a salary range for these positions. I just want to see, so again, physical requirements, Monday through Friday day hours. Oh, there are some questions here. Describe your experience with electronic payroll systems. So there are some specific questions for other positions as well. So just an example of what that would look like. What human resources, and like I said, human resources post those positions. Let's see, the job descriptions have to be accurate and they have to be posted before the job is advertised or the interviewing begins. You think of why that might be? Anybody have any idea of why would that be necessary? To make sure the job description is put together before you start hiring anybody. Anybody have any ideas? You can raise your hand if you do.
So the employer can make the right questions in the interview.
Yep. Yeah. So and this would be, so that those questions though, it would be specific to the job, right? Not to the employee. Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, mine is basically saying the same thing. I lost all my everything else, but on my page. But mine was more saying like if you want something specific for that department, if you have it in advance, then you know how to work to get toward whatever that is that you want.
Right. It helps to ensure that you're getting someone with the correct qualifications, right? It also reduces the risk of designing a job specifically for a particular applicant, right? So if you interview a bunch of people for a job and say, hey, I really like this person, let's make sure that the job description fits what they can do, that's putting the cart before the horse. You need to make the job description, the applicant should be able to perform the functions, but it shouldn't be designed specifically for a particular applicant, right? Otherwise, there's discrimination going on because you're basing it on the attributes of one individual rather than the needs of the position. Electronically, yeah. So all of this stuff, and if you notice, so like on DMAX, what you do is you create a DMAC account here. So you can create an account. Once you've created that account, you create a username and a password, then you log in, and then you go and apply for the position. So everything is done online. I'm sure there are still places out there that do things on paper, but I'm not familiar with them. Let's see here. We're going to skip that and that. Okay, so the employment application. So you saw and I don't want to, I suppose I could try and log in so we can see what the application looks like. You guys all probably know what employment applications look like, but generally speaking, they're going to ask for your name, your first name, last name, maybe middle name, address. They won't ask for your social security number. They should not ask for your birth date. They would ask for information about past experience, past employment experience, past educational experience. They can only include questions about these items, so gender, national origin, criminal background, if there is a bona fide occupational reason to do so. Now, a lot of jobs do ask, have you been convicted of a felony within, like the last 10 years, or have you ever been convicted of a felony? That may be a bona fide question, depending upon the position. And a lot of payroll positions, probably all of them, that would be a bona fide question to ask. Now, there may be a further, more it might not exactly exclude somebody from a position, but an employer would probably be less likely to hire somebody who has a felony on their background, depending upon what that felony is, especially if it's a financial crime. If you were convicted of writing bad checks or of theft, things along those lines, you really don't want somebody with that kind of background working in a payroll department, right? So they are you can ask those questions if there's a bona fide reason. Now, like gender, if you're hiring for a position, an attendant in a ladies' locker room at the gym, that's going to be gender specific. They're not going to hire a male for a position like that, and vice versa if it's somebody in the male, an attendant in the male locker room, that sort of thing. National origin, I'm trying to think if I can think of an example of when that would be. I can't think of one off the top of my head. Any background checks that are done, they can do background checks, but it has to be in compliance with this Fair Credit Reporting Act. So, and off the top of my head, I don't know the provisions of that, but it would have to be in compliance with that. Aptitude and psychological tests are only lawful if they relate to job performance. Police officers are required to undergo psychological testing for obvious reasons. They are given a lot of power. They are given firearms. They're given certain tools and responsibilities and rights that the general public doesn't have. And we need to make sure that those who are taking on that position don't have any, mental health issues going on or issues with anger management. Now, obviously, The screening doesn't entirely rid police departments of individuals who do have mental health issues and some anger issues and other types of issues that go on. But that would just be an example of when it would be lawful to give such a test. Drug testing varies state to state. And actually, I don't know with Iowa. I'm not even going to guess. My assumption would be they can drug test you. And again, it might depend upon the position that you're applying for. Like if you're a bus driver, you probably maybe have to go through some drug testing. Just any position where the health and safety of another individual, you're responsible for the health and safety of another individual or individuals, would probably require some of those types of tests. So things that employers can do in order to minimize the chance of lawsuits, because this is a highly litigated area, employment law. You know, there's a lot of discrimination, a lot of inadvertent discrimination that happens, but a lot of discrimination that happens. And some of the things that employers can do to minimize the risk of any potential lawsuits: only accept applications online. Have a person not involved in the interviews process review the applications, and use applicant screening software. So think about those three things. I just wonder if anybody can give me some examples or think of some reasons why those would be appropriate safeguards to guard against lawsuits. And any of those three, if you want to talk about. Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Well, again, having more than one person look at the same person, you have a chance of it not being a conspiracy, like, okay, I like this person, you like this person, we'll make this person, you know, it really goes by the qualifications.
Right, exactly. Perfect. I know there was another hand up too. I didn't see who it was, but yeah, Tammy.
Also, with the software and the applications online, it doesn't have prejudice with it. So they're only looking at the facts.
Right. It's very black and white. Whatever's on paper, they're not looking at the individual as they come in. So making prejudgments, right, about that individual. There are and there are different lines of thought with regard to what information you should put on a resume. If you ever take if you're in the specialist program, you will take accounting professionalism if you haven't already, and we go through this in professionalism. But there are those who think you shouldn't even, you shouldn't put your address on a resume, because even the address can be prejudicial. It can be, an example of that might be if an applicant is an applicant for a job in Iowa, maybe somebody from Hawaii is applying for a job in Iowa, and they're absolutely qualified for the job. There would be a fantastic person in the position, but the person reviewing the applications thinks there's no way somebody from Hawaii is going to move to Iowa, so we're just not even going to look at them. So even things as simple as an address or location can be prejudicial. Now, there probably, if you're applying, the application is going to have a spot for address, and it might be unavoidable. But it's just interesting how those pieces of information that we think are benign, it's our address, it's where we live. What difference does it make? It actually can make a difference, right? Even like, a certain part of town, that sort of thing might cause someone who's hiring to reevaluate whether they want that person, which is completely discriminatory, and but it's just kind of human nature. But there are no protections against address. Like you're not legally protected based upon your address. You're legally protected based upon your gender, your national origin, your religion, your race, all that. Address is not one of those protections. So, technically speaking, a potential employer wouldn't be, unless there's specifics in state law, wouldn't be in violation of any federal laws by judging an applicant based upon where they live, right or not, right? Let's see. So good answers, by the way. Thank you. And thank you for chiming in. So some states now, have you ever filled out an application for employment and they ask you, or had somebody else, maybe a friend or somebody you know, fill out an application and they ask what their salary history is? Have you ever experienced that, either personally or otherwise? Mm-hmm. So LaKenya, yeah, and Julia as well. So you guys have both experienced it personally or know somebody. Can you speak to that? What was your experience with it?
Well, I know that usually employment offices, they don't necessarily allow to talk about that. But especially with temp agencies, I know a few of my coworkers would reach out and say, hey, just out of curiosity, if you're being hired from temp to full-time with the company, does your salary go up? Are you allowed to talk about that? Because that's an experience that happened with me. We're just wondering if it was worth it to stay with the company.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, Danielle.
And also, well, I have seen that, and something that it's been really beneficial for me is that if you like can leave it in blank, just put like negotiable, and then in the interview you kind of see what it goes. I don't know. It's really nervous.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And there are some companies will do this on the application. I don't think it's illegal in Iowa. There are some states where it is not legal to ask this question until a job has actually been offered. Reason being that it can, if you're filling out an application, potential employees filling out an application, and maybe the salary range that the employer has in mind is, let's just say it's like a clerk position at a shop. They're taking $14 an hour. They have an applicant who says, they've got the question there about previous salary. Oh, my previous salary was $11 an hour. Well, now the employer may decide to change the salary based upon what the applicant has put down. And really, the salary should be based on the position and the work, not on the past history of the applicant, right? And conversely, if the applicant came in and said, I made $18 an hour, and the employer is paying $14 an hour, the employer might say, well, that person, they'd never accept this offer because it's going to be less than what they made in the past. Well, not necessarily. Right? I mean, most people, probably would not want to go down in salary, but there are certain, what's the word I'm looking for? Certain intangibles about jobs that may make it more appealing than even taking a higher paid position. Maybe the schedule works better, right? Maybe it's a full-time job instead of a part-time job. Well, my last job, it was $18 an hour, but I only worked 20 hours a week, and this one is 40 hours a week, and you're offering benefits. So it can unnecessarily prejudice the hiring process by asking those questions. And it makes assumptions about applicants as well that are not always accurate, right? Those applications need to be kept on file for 1 year as well. After that time, they can be disposed of. References. What do you guys think about references? Anybody ever called your references in a job? No? Lisa, no?
Yeah, almost all of mine.
Almost all of yours? They have called the references? How? And so when you are giving them references, because they don't just, except for possibly calling your previous employer, the references came from the applicant, right? Like, if I put references down, these are going to be people that I've already asked them if they will be a reference, and hopefully they're only going to agree to it if they can give me a good referral, right? And I'm not going to ask somebody to be a reference if they're not a good referral, if I don't have a good relationship with them, if I think they're going to give me a bad reference. So, the utility of references is questionable. And as well, a lot of employers, previous employers, they don't want to give really any information of value to the potential employer, the potential new employer, because they could open themselves up then to lawsuits. So if they give if they say, oh yeah, well, Julia, yeah, she never showed up on time. She was always leaving late. She's, she was absent all the time. I wouldn't hire her. Well, Julia could find out that they gave a reference like that, and maybe that never actually even happened. Maybe Julia was a stellar employee, but that employer was mad when Julia left, right? And so they're going to give a bad reference just to spite Julia. So the utility of those references is really questionable. But a lot of times employers, in order to make sure they don't get caught in any legal issue, because in that case, then Julia could, if she doesn't get that job, Julia could turn around and sue the previous employer for giving that false information. A lot of previous employers, what they'll just do is give dates of hire and termination, and that's it. That's the only information that they will give. So the quality of references can really be questionable. Yeah. Julia, did you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. So legally, if another employer asks why the employee was terminated, are they allowed to say legally why?
I think in Iowa they can, but most probably would just, if they're smart, they wouldn't. And it's going to depend state by state as well. And I say that not knowing specifically if in Iowa, if they are allowed. I'm just, from what I know about Iowa employment law, it's pretty lenient. But that's a great, if anybody wants to go out and try and look that up, you go right ahead and share it with us specifically. But I don't know of any restrictions on that in the state of Iowa. Other states, there very well might be restrictions on that. But the safe bet is always just to give date of hire, date of termination. That's it. Yeah, go ahead, Julia.
Sorry, I have another question about that. So if there is a situation where an employment office offers you the job and you have accepted it, but then they decided not to go with you, could you also possibly sue them for a false acceptance or something like that? I forgot.
You know what? I think because Iowa is an at-will state, which means essentially that unless you have a written contract, the employer can terminate you at any time for any reason, and you can quit at any time for any reason as well, unless there is a contract in place. I don't think you would have any recourse. Now, if they did sign a contract saying, we're going to hire you for, here's your employment contract, we're going to pay you this amount for a year, for the next year, then you probably would have legal recourse. But without a written contract, you probably wouldn't, because of it being an at-will. They don't have to have cause. It would be like any other termination, wouldn't it? It would just, hey, you're fired. Okay. If you do, and that contract is what protects employees. So let's see, what else do I want to say? I know we're about running out of time here. Employees have to have access to their HR file. So the HR department would give a hiring notice to the payroll department once an employee is hired, to get them into the system, give them their W-4 form so they know about withholding, what their pay rate is, and all of that information. So then they would communicate with payroll. Payroll's not going to get involved until the individual is actually an employee, has actually been hired. That's when payroll will step in then and put them into the system. Let's see. And as it mentions here, employee may be at will or for good cause only. Again, that's going to be, that contract is what protects employees if you have a contract. It can also be a detriment though, because oftentimes contracts will also have a non-compete clause in them, which means that you might not be able to, especially for professionals, you might not, it might limit where you can work after you leave employment. So for example, my position, my CPA position that I had in Ames before coming to DMAC, I had a non-compete clause, which said that I could not open my own firm within 2 years after leaving employment, and I couldn't within the Story or Boone counties. So that was my limitation. I mean, I didn't open a firm, but the idea was, I think it was within Story and Polk counties, not Boone County, Story and Polk County. And the idea was that then limited my ability to steal clients and open my own firm by having that. But that can also be limiting for individuals who are leaving employment. Let's see. Okay, this is actually a good place to stop. We've only got a few more slides to go through in this chapter, which we will do next Tuesday. Again, first off, do you have any questions? No? It's nice that we didn't have any technical issues this time around. We're actually able to get through a lecture. So I did record this, so I will post it if there's anything you want to go through again in it. But we will get started on your homework. Get a good way into your homework for next Tuesday so that we can look at some of those homework questions, because like I said, we've got only a few more slides really to go through here. I want to introduce to you the payroll register and the employee earnings record. Those are the two biggies. Two big documents we'll be working with a lot throughout this class. And that's really pretty much all we have left to talk about with regard to the lecture. And then we can spend the rest of the time looking at homework problems, if you have any. All right. If there aren't any questions, stay safe. I guess the snow has stopped falling. So your roads down there, I think, or at least in Des Moines, are a lot better than they are up here. I don't know if the plow has come yet to get me out. So anyway, have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you very much.